Hello everybody and welcome to this video. In this video I'm painting a realistic looking dog in oil paints on a 16 by 20 inch canvas. This painting was actually done as a commission and I'll be talking you through all the steps of how I did it. So as you can see at the very beginning I go over the outline of the dog in blue acrylic paints, and then I go over the entire canvas in brown with acrylics again. After that, I then decide to come back in with some oil paints and I start to dive really well into that brown colour. I decide very early on that I would like to have that deep brown colour around the edges of the dog, and which is another technique I used in my other video on painting a horse, which I'll link to you in a card somewhere up above. So I go over this fairly slowly and it's in oil paints mixed with slow drying medium, so I'm able to come back the next day and start with the dog. So for the dog it is mainly just black and white, but there are greys and purples and pink tones within there as well, just as there is with any white or black creature, or just any white colour really. So I fill in most of the blocking stages with blocking it in with the black. I don't really change much from the black. This is Mars black mixed in with a little bit of just ordinary brown just to give it a little more contrast. And then after I've filled in most of the areas with the black, I go in with some grey tones and start to dive into that. That will later on be blurred out more and it'll be worked into the black a little more just to enable it to shine just ever so slightly and create some three-dimensionality. So I also go around the jawline of the dog because I realised it would be quite easy to lose that jawline on the dog if it was all black. So I outlined that with a little bit of white, but that will slowly disappear, but also helps to create that three-dimensionality again. Also, as you can see, I'm working on the nose and I've outlined I filled it in with the black and I've outlined the nostrils themselves with a little bit of dark grey. For the lighter parts of the dog, you can see I've filled it in with some darker grey, and I do come back in and add more highlights, but this is just the first stage of the entire painting, which is primarily used just to block in the colours, work out where the colours, and just get that little bit of paint down. I'm not using very thick layers of paint, they're very, very thin, so they can dry quite quickly, and I am using fast drying medium by Winsor and Winton. But then later on, as I get into more stages of the painting, I use liquid original. So just as you can see, I'm not using just bright titanium white or anything straight out of the bat. I'm just filling in those big blocking colours, and once I've done that first initial stage of it, I come back in with some more oil paints and decide to go back into the background, as you'll never want to just have one layer for that background. I like to work into it a little more, and I will do one last layer on the background before the entire painting's finished, which will just allow me to have it more showing depth as well, and I'll go into it with some lighter brown, and that will show a vignette as well. So a vignette is around the side of the canvas around the side of the canvas with a little bit of darker. You'll most often see that technique used in photography. If you've ever studied photography, it's not something always visible, but it is there. Also, I go back into the ears with some pink. As I did say, it's not all white, there are pink areas, and I go back into it using some real dark black this time. So this black is not mixed in with the brown. And this layer is actually done with liquid original medium, so it dries a little slower, but I quite like it as it allows me to work into it a little more, and the layer's not too much thicker, but just enough thickness that it works really well and you can't see the bottom of the canvas anymore. So I also work into the dog's eyes ever so slightly, just filling them in with just big lumps of black. I do go back with them to add in those highlights and everything, but for the time being they're just lumps of black like coal. And working on the dog's chest area was quite fun actually. I enjoyed that because it helps to enable that shadow and help bring out that 3D effect within the dog itself, and the whole painting I feel comes together with that. I'm not completely obsessed with the details of the dog, but I don't know if you can see the reference image to the left hand side on the tablet, but you can actually see around the dog's eyes that he has the most amazing little white specks, which I was so keen to get into, and I did go really into detail a little bit with those, but not overboard, but I did enjoy those. They were very, very enjoyable to do. So I do the left side first, primarily because you usually do, and the main reason you start with the left side is if you ever painted, you'll find your hand gets smudged if you start with the right side, and the painting will get smudged, you'll get oil paints on your hands, and you really don't want to be doing that, especially if they have medium in them, as it's just really not good and it will ruin your painting. So also you can see the nose here is still just primarily just a block of coal, and that's not really what we want. We want to have that nose pointing at the forefront, being able to come forward, and I do put blues and pinks into that nose, and I go back in with a little bit of white, and it allows it to pop out more. And so you can see there as well, I've gone back in to the eyes and just filled out those highlights. I do go back into them as well again later on, and I start to get really stuck into some of the details, but I need that layer of white specks to dry before I can do anything, otherwise they'll get too smudged. So I go in with some of those details, as this is the main second layer of the painting, and you can see I've started to add in those little specks onto the nose, and I'm starting to add in some more of those visible hairs on the side of his nose, and it really starts to bring it together as you can see the different layers of the painting itself go backwards with the three-dimensionality, is what I mean. It is quite hard to explain, but I'm sure you do understand it. And then after that's all done and dusted, I'm waiting for that to dry, and I'll start with the top of the head. And so, as I explained earlier, those initial grey bits that I put on the top of the head, I'm going over this time, and with some black, and having that little bit of undertone just helps it bring out a little more shine within his forehead. So I'm going in with a quite small bristle brush this time, and I'm filling out those details along his forehead a little more, trying to give off that illusion and effect of fur. Not too much. I'm not going into every little strike of fur, little strip of fur, but just enough to give it that visual effect that you know it's there. So I'm going over that nose again as well, just trying to blend in some more of that, the paints, to try and create that effect. I'm often asked about how I create textures within my paintings. It's not the hardest thing to do, but it is quite challenging when you first start out with paintings, especially oil paintings, as a lot of people struggle with the drying and waiting times for the paintings. So in order to create textures, I thought this would be a great painting to show you the texture and how you can create it. As an awful lot of people presume in order to have textures within your paintings and to make them look realistic, you need to have so much detail within your artwork. You don't need so much detail that it's over the top. We're not going for a photorealistic looking painting here. We're going for a textured, realistic looking animal. And so you can see just by adding in a few of those little dibble dabbles, whatever you want to call them, around the eyes of that white fur, you can see it starts to create those textures, and the fur starts to become alive around his nose as well. That is a massive factor. So all the time when you do an oil painting or any sort of painting, you'll always want to work from dark to light, and so that's what I've done here. As you can remember from the beginning of the painting, I just filled it out with really deep dark tones and just almost matte black, really, or just Mars black around the whole painting. But the more you build it up, the lighter and brighter you want those colours to be. And so I'm going in with a much smaller brush this time as well, and I'm not going over every inch of his muzzle at all. I'm just going over a few of them just to create that texture and that effect to make it look like it's real. The chest area was a lot of fun to do because of the shadows there. As I said, you can see the shadow on the left side of his chest, allows his face to come forwards more and puts his nose up slightly, and that's a great effect to have as it contrasts really well against that black of his mouth. Remember, as I said I was afraid to lose his jawline as well. If you look very, very closely, you can still make out his jawline just by that tiny little effect of white, of that white base layer I put in at the very beginning. That's something I never really wanted to lose, and so that will stay like that, and it's just ever so visible that your mind sees it and it knows what it's doing. So once I filled out those details around his eyes, I then decided to go back in with a slightly larger brush that's been cut a few times around the bristles, and this is a synthetic bristle brush, and I'm just smudging in ever so slightly those textures around his eyes and those dots and the specks, as I feel you don't want it over detailed. By no means do you want it so detailed that it's just unrecognizable from a photograph, because there'd be very little point in it. I do understand it, but I think for this painting it didn't need that photorealistic looking effect. It needed that painterly effect, which I think was captured fairly well, especially around his eyes. They were the biggest factor I was trying to get in, so I spent quite a while developing those eyes. And as I said, this was a commission given to me to paint this dog that's passed away, unfortunately, and that's where I feel the eyes are the windows to the soul, so I spent most of my time developing them. And yes, but remember that Vignette effect. This is where, for the final section of the entire painting, I go back in for the final time on that background, trying to create it, and as you can see, creating that Vignette effect with that black rim around the painting starts to bring more of the highlights of the dog outwards, and especially his nose and his muzzle. They are the forefront of the entire painting and really shine this amazing light onto him. And yes, I hope you have enjoyed this little painting and the chat and the talk. So if you have, please give me a thumbs up, a like, and subscribe. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy it.